Welcome back, everybody. Session 4, talking about the chapter Orthodox Foundations today, but also kind of getting into part 2 proper of the book, Sam, the most kind of overtly scholarly part of the book. Though I would say that folks need not be intimidated by that. I think this section is cleverly organized and easy enough to follow. In this chapter, we're talking about the Orthodox tradition. A tradition, you might say, that has a lot more sympathy for the gospel of being with in general than traditional Western voices. Where do you see common ground between traditional Eastern Orthodox teaching and your own? Or maybe better, what's the most fruitful kind of area of overlap that you see?
Well, I think there's probably one obvious area of overlap and one obvious area of tension. So the obvious area of overlap is, as described, it's probably one of the most significant passages of the book, which doesn't come from me. I'm quoting Andrew Louth, the contemporary Orthodox theologian, where he talks about the two
A
arches,
double.
the inner arch that goes from fall to cross, and the outer arch that goes from
So helpful.
creation to the last day. And I think in possibly the conclusion suggests that I'm actually talking about an even bigger arch that goes from Trinity to heaven. But that basic picture, I think everyone can latch onto, and I've used it such a lot, and people always quote it. I think I've made him famous, modestly. So that's the similarity, in a sense, that orthodoxy, most Orthodox believers, certainly most Orthodox theologians, would be quite comfortable with saying that the West has overemphasized the fall and has, in a sense, reduced the cross to being a response to the fall, and there's a bigger story to be told. So in that sense, the extraordinary thing about the book is that I had more or less conceived the book before I'd really put my finger on that. It was only Geoffrey Reddy, I shouldn't say only, but it was in conversations with Geoffrey Reddy, the Toronto Orthodox theologian, that it became clear to me that a chapter on Orthodox was absolutely essential, because he persuaded me that, well, his view is that, when he read Nazareth Manifesto, he said, well, this is orthodoxy. And I disagree with him about that, but, he's better placed to judge really than I am. But he got very excited about all of that and has remained so since, and been a conversation partner since. So that's the similarity. That doesn't mean that Orthodox theologians have the same reading of the cross that I do, but the early theologians of the church, up until Anselm, and we'll come on to this probably in chapter 10, but up until Anselm, who really significantly changed the church's understanding of salvation and the emphasis on the cross that we have today in most of the Western theology, is, he in a sense was the crucial figure in that, no pun intended. So before that, what we'd think of today as the Orthodox perspective was the predominant one. So that's the point of convergence. The point of difference is, and I sort of wrestle with this in the chapter, to what degree the Orthodox notion of deification, that perhaps best expressed in the phrase "He became what we are, that we might become what He is,"
Sure, Ernest, yeah.
is to what extent that suggests we are kind of either becoming gods or becoming part of God. Both of which I think are problematic. They dissolve what's technically called the creator-creature distinction, the infinite qualitative difference, as one theologian calls it, between creation and God. And so but also for me, to be dissolved into God isn't salvation, because it's not being with. And I think, as I would say, but, this is my whole sort of theological stick really, is that I think the notion of being with gets significant further than notions of resurrection that are just kind of continued being or restored being. It's about relationship. And I do think that's the single dimension of this book, that even its critics, I think, would acknowledge. This book gives theology a much richer notion of how relationship is central to our notion of eschatology, but also retrospectively central to our whole notion of what it means to live a fully alive existence.
Yeah, you have a sentence in this chapter in which you're talking about the tension between being with and the Orthodox idea of deification when you say what's at stake is whether or not you consider God to be a noun or a verb.
So what I'm saying there, it may seem like a weird thing to say, but I'm saying that relationship is so integral to the notion of God in a way that we almost have never in theology recognized. That's how I see it. We've seen, the absoluteness of God, the almightiness of God, and relationships obviously happen, but what really happens is that God saves us, which is almost transactional. Whereas the point that I'm making is that the relationship is what it's all about. And that's almost making God into a verb, because the Trinity is a relationship more than it's three persons. And so being with is about a relationship more than it's about the people that make up that relationship.
Thank you.